Think you know how much $100,000 a year can buy you? Well, it all depends on the loan you use and how aggressive you're willing to get. Would you rather play it safe or maximize your buying power? At the moment, housing is expensive, rates are high, and affordability is tight. But what I want to do is break down what someone making $100,000 a year can qualify for using 4 different methods. We're going to talk about Dave Ramsey's method. We're going to talk about the 28/36 rule. We're also going to talk about conventional financing as well as FHA finance. And on top of that, I'm going to show you how to compute your debt to income ratio so that you can do some back of the napkin calculations. Maybe you don't make exactly $100,000 a year. Maybe you make $95,000 or $120,000. Well, we're going to break down exactly how a lender comes up with your debt to income ratio along with what they allow so that you can break it down using your salary. Now, one thing you're going to notice as we go through all of these different methods, we're really going from the most conservative approach, which is Dave Ramsey's method, to the most aggressive, which is going to be an FHA loan, because they allow you to buy a home with as little as 3.5% down and finance up to 47% of your gross monthly income on a housing payment. Now, before we get started using Dave Ramsey's method, I want to take a minute here and just talk about salary, right? How do you actually break down that salary to figure out how much home you can actually afford? Because that's what lenders do when they determine how much they're willing to lend you. Well, it's important to understand a lender uses your gross monthly salary. So in the case that you make $100,000 a year, you divide that by 12, which comes out to $8,333 per month. And that's exactly what the lender is going to use. They're going to use your gross monthly income before any taxes come out. Now, I know you pay taxes. I know you pay money probably into a 401k. You probably have health insurance. You might even have a deferred comp, or in some cases, you might have judgments. And on top of that, you have things like groceries. You have money that you spend on gas. You have childcare. You have all of these different expenses that you pay every single month. Well, guess what? The lender doesn't care. They're using your gross monthly salary before any taxes come out. So I want you to remember that number of $8,333 because it's going to come up later in this video as we start breaking down these different methods. But there is one method that wants you to take taxes out of that gross monthly salary in order to compute how much home you can truly afford. And that's Dave Ramsey's method. Dave Ramsey doesn't want you to spend more than 25% of your take-home pay on the mortgage payment, the property taxes, the insurance, any HOA, basically your total monthly payment. So in the case of a $100,000 salary breaking down to $8,333 a month before taxes, we have to assume you pay about 20% in taxes, which means your take-home pay is going to be about $6,666 per month. So in the case of Dave Ramsey's method, he doesn't want you to spend more than 25% of that $6,666 on your total housing expenses, which in this case is $1,666 per month. Now, if you're like me and you hear that payment, you're going, well, what can you actually buy with just $1,666 a month? Well, we're actually going to take a look at that in just a second. But it's important to understand Dave Ramsey's approach, right? He is very conservative. He's trying to keep people from hurting themselves. And he does this by limiting exposure, if you will, when it comes to how much you make versus how much you spend. And while I don't think his method is wrong, what I will say is it's nearly impossible to buy a home in most areas of the country using his method today unless you have a huge down payment. And what I know from making YouTube videos over the last 5 or so years is that my audience doesn't usually have a huge down payment. In fact, most of you have somewhere between 3.5% and 20% down, which is why we're also going to break down conventional and FHA in this same video. Now, another thing to note about Dave Ramsey is he also wants you to put 20% down when buying a house. So I'm going to show you what you can buy using a conventional loan putting 20% down and what you can buy using an FHA loan only putting 3.5% down, being a little bit more aggressive. So in the case that we start with a conventional loan and you're buying, say, a $250,000 home, that means you're going to need a down payment of $50,000, which at the end of the day means you're financing $200,000. Well, today's mortgage rates on a conventional loan are sitting somewhere around 6.75%, which means your principal and interest payment is going to be $1,297 per month. On top of that, you're going to have property taxes. Now, property taxes are going to vary based on where you are in the country. The nationwide average is somewhere around 1.1%. But understand, parts of the country have taxes over 2%. So depending on where you're located in the US, your property taxes are going to vary. But for today's video, I'm going to use 1.25% when it comes to property taxes, which means your taxes are going to be $260 per month. Now, because you're putting 20% down, you don't have mortgage insurance, but you are going to need homeowners insurance on that property, which most lenders are going to estimate at 0.35%. So in the case of a $250,000 home, your property taxes are probably going to be somewhere around $52 a month. You might be watching this going, Jeb, you're crazy. My homeowner's insurance is $2,000 a year. Well, unfortunately, a lot like property taxes, depending on where you are located in the country, is going to dictate how much you pay per month. But again, what I'm doing is using more of an average, which means all in, once you factor in the mortgage payment, the property taxes, and the homeowner's insurance, your total mortgage payment is going to be $1,610 per month, which fits right beneath Dave Ramsey's max of $1,666. But here's the caveat with that. You had to put 20% down in order to get to that payment. So what I want to do now is say you don't have 20% down, but you still want to keep your payment below that 25% of your take-home pay. Well, with that said, I wanted to use an FHA loan. And in the case of an FHA, your purchase price is probably going to be closer to $200,000 than the $250,000 putting 20% down. Now, one nice thing about FHA is that interest rates are about 0.5% better. So today's interest rate is 6.25% versus that 6.65% that we mentioned on conventional. So in the case that you buy this $200,000 home, that means you're going to have a $7,000 down payment. That's 3.5%. But remember, you have to factor in that 1.75% funding fee because FHA requires it on every single loan. So you're actually going to end up financing $196,377, which is going to give you a mortgage payment of $1,209 per month. Your property taxes, again, at 1.25%, it's going to be $208 per month. And because this is an FHA loan, you're also going to have monthly mortgage insurance at 0.55%, which is going to break down to $90 per month. And on top of that, you're going to have homeowners insurance, which we talked about earlier, is going to be 0.35%, which in this case is going to be $58 per month. So all in, that gives you a total mortgage payment of $1,565, which again is going to be below Dave Ramsey's $1,666. So in the case of using FHA, you could probably bump the price by say $5,000 or maybe even $10,000, getting you closer to $210,000. So like I mentioned, Dave Ramsey's method is very, very conservative. Now the next approach that you're going to see is something that's out there all over the internet, and it's this idea about a 28/36 ratio being the ideal ratio for someone buying a home. And you're probably watching this going, what does that even mean? Well, a 28/36 is essentially your debt to income ratio. It's how a lender determines how much home you can actually afford. So the 28 in this case is they're saying 28 can't be more than 28% of your gross monthly income. So in the case of the 28, that means 28% of your gross monthly income. So if you remember, that's $8,333. We take 28% of that, that's $2,333. That's the most that you can spend on your housing payment, including property taxes, insurance, HOA, all the things we discussed earlier. So remember, Dave Ramsey was $1,666. The 28/36 rule gives you about $700 more per month, taking you to $2,333. But you're probably wondering, well, what is the 36? The 36 is 36% of your gross monthly income. So in this case, that's $3,000. Now that's going to include that front end ratio, your housing expenses of $2,333, but it's also saying that you can have $667 per month in other debts, things like credit cards, car payments, student loans. So basically the 28/36 method doesn't want you spending total monthly payment, including your housing expenses, plus those other debts that I mentioned. They don't want you going over $3,000 per month. So in the case that you're buying using a conventional loan and you're putting 20% down, you would probably be maxed out somewhere around $350,000, assuming you were trying to keep your housing expenses under that $2,333 per month. And basically how that breaks down is you have a $350,000 purchase price, you're putting $70,000 down, that's 20%, which means you're financing $280,000. As we mentioned earlier, today's interest rates are sitting around 6.75%, which means your mortgage payment is going to be $1,816 per month. Your property taxes would be roughly $364 per month. Now remember, you're not going to have mortgage insurance because you're putting 20% down, but you are going to have homeowners insurance units, and using that same calculation as earlier, that's going to be about $102 per month, which gives you an all-in mortgage payment of $2,283 using conventional loan, putting 20% down, trying to keep those ratios at 28/36. And in the case that you want to use FHA and only put 3.5% down, save the other 16.5%, if you will, that's going to cap you off at around $300,000 when it comes to purchase price. Now, the nice thing is you only have to come up with $10,500 versus the $70,000 putting 20% down. But at the same time, you're also limited by about $50,000 in purchase price. Now, with that said, using FHA, buying that $300,000 home, the total mortgage payment is going to be $2,348, which is right in line with that 28/36 method. Before we talk about conventional financing, I want to make it very, very clear that you should still talk to a lender when trying to do these calculations. Don't go out, do these calculations, think that you're pre-qualified because your salary meets, what we've discussed here and you're just ready to go buy a home. There's a lot more to it than just what we're talking about here. And you really need a lender to go through it with a fine-tooth comb just to make sure you're fully pre-approved and make sure all the numbers match up. Now, with that said, my team has helped hundreds of people here on YouTube and we'd love to help you too. So if you're looking for somebody to guide you through this process, just like I'm doing in this video, make sure you click that link in the description. So far, we've talked about Dave Ramsey's method. We've talked about the 28/36 rule. Now we want to get a little bit more aggressive and talk about conventional financing. Now, when we talk about conventional financing today, we're going to talk using 20% down. You can buy a home with conventional financing with as little as 3% down. You can buy it with 5, 10. You can buy a home using conventional loan as long as you have 3% down. But in today's video, I want to talk about putting 20% down, and then we'll talk about FHA putting only 3.5% down. Now, the nice thing about conventional and FHA is that the ratios are both higher than what we've discussed previously in the video. We said Dave Ramsey is super conservative, and we've said the 28/36 rule is a little bit more lenient. Conventional allows you to use 49.99% of your gross monthly income towards housing expenses, assuming you have no other debt. Now, if you have other debts, car payments, credit cards, student loans, that sort of thing, you're not going to be able to cap out at 49.99%. But in the case of today's video, we're going to say that you can max out that 49.99% using conventional loan. You make $100,000 a year. We're going to show you exactly how much you can afford. So remember, our gross monthly salary is $8,333. If we multiply that by 49.99%, that means we can go up to $4,165, including our mortgage payment, property taxes, homeowners insurance, everything associated with that home. Now, I'll be very, very clear. This isn't something I recommend. In fact, I don't think anyone should be pushing these ratios anywhere close to 50%. Remember, these ratio requirements are ceilings, if you will. They're not necessarily a target I would shoot for, but at the end of the day, this is how a lender is going to determine how much home you can buy. But it's always up to you to determine how much home you can actually afford. But in the case of conventional, we can go up to $4,165 in this example, which is going to put us at a purchase price somewhere just over $600,000. But if we were to buy a $600,000 home, putting 20% down, that means we're coming in with a $120,000 down payment. We're financing $480,000. Now, again, we're not going to have mortgage insurance because we're putting 20% down. But with that said, mortgage rates are going to be at 6.75% as we used previously in the video, giving us a mortgage payment of $3,113 per month. Now, on top of that, we're going to have our property taxes. Again, we're using 1.25%, which means $625 a month. And we're also going to have homeowners insurance, which in this case is going to be $175 a month. So all in, that's going to give us a total mortgage payment of $3,913, which falls below that $4,165, which actually gives us a little room to have some other monthly debt. But remember, with conventional financing, it's a little more stringent, right? It's not quite as lenient as FHA. So in order to push these ratios to the high end, say 49.99%, you're going to have really good credit. You're also going to have some money in the bank outside of your down payment and closing costs. You really need some compensating factors in order to push these ratios. But that's where FHA comes in handy when you're trying to push these ratios, because not only do they allow you to really buy more home with more debt, they're also less restrictive on credit score as you're pushing these ratios. Now, the thing to note about FHA is the ratios are a little bit different. They have a front-end ratio max and a back-end ratio max. The front-end ratio max is going to be 47%. That means your housing expenses can't be more than 47% of your gross monthly income. And you're probably watching this going, 47%? Who could actually afford to do that? Well, a lot of people do push these ratios because they have other income that's maybe not documented. Maybe they have a second job, they drive for Uber, or maybe they have a side gig where they bring in income and it's just not being calculated. So these people are a little bit more willing to push these ratios. But in the case of FHA, 47% max front end ratio, but they also allow you to go as high as a 56.99% on the back end ratio, which in the case of FHA, that means your front end ratio cannot exceed $3,917 a month, and your back end ratio cannot exceed $4,750 a month. Now remember, your back end ratio is your front end ratio, all your housing expenses, plus any other monthly debts that you have. So in the case of these ratios and the numbers we're using, you could have about $820 or so in monthly debt and still be able to push that ratio to the max if you wanted to do FHA. Again, not recommending it, just telling you how the numbers actually work. Now here's the thing with FHA. Yes, you're going to come in with less down payment, but you're also going to be capped on your purchase price less than conventional, because conventional, you're putting more money down. Yes, the ratios are higher with FHA, but because you're putting so much more down with conventional, you're able to buy more home. But in the case of FHA and a $100,000 salary, you're going to be capped out somewhere around a $500,000 purchase price. Now, we're going to break that down to $17,500 for the down payment, along with $8,444 for the funding fee, which means you're actually financing $490,943. Now, again, because FHA rates are a little bit better, the interest rate is 6.25%, giving you a mortgage payment of $3,023. The property taxes are going to be $458 per month. Homeowners insurance is going to be roughly $145 a month. But because you're using FHA, you're going to have monthly mortgage insurance, which is going to be $225 per month, giving you a total monthly mortgage payment of $3,851, which means you can maybe go up a little bit in purchase price, but not much over $500,000. So after hearing all of that, which do you feel like is the best out of Dave Ramsey's method, the 28/36 method, conventional financing, or FHA? Do me a favor and let me know in the comments. Now, as I mentioned earlier, it's very, very important that you're working with a professional, somebody that understands these numbers. So again, please don't go search online for a mortgage broker, because you're going to get a lot of yahoos that have no idea what they're doing. We've helped hundreds of people here on YouTube, so if you'd like guidance from a professional, do me a favor and click that link in the description. But lastly, if you're watching this and you make less than $100,000 a year, maybe you're closer to the average income here in the United States of $65,000 a year, and you're wondering what you can afford, do me a favor and check out this video here.